right, welcome back to the Prospecting Show. Today is Thursday, June 24th, and we have an interesting guest on the show today. First off, welcome to the show, Eddy, Badrina. How are you today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Connor.
Yeah, absolutely. So your story is kind of cool here. I talked to a lot of people that are entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs, people who've built things, sold things, exited, acquired, whatever it is. You've done a few different businesses, right? You've grown a few different things. But I think the interesting part about you that you told me about before the show is Filipino immigrant, first generation American, which I think is super thumbs up, because I think there's a lot of people that I talk to on the show, very like standard American, like grew up in a family that was already here, well established, took over a business, learned the business skills, and then built their own business after that. In your case, it's like, hey, you came in probably the most difficult circumstances for you to actually, work your way up, and you have a very interesting story. So before we get into what you're doing today, give us the rundown. As you came to the U.S., building everything. Start from the beginning.
Yeah. So my parents came to the U.S. from the Philippines in 1969. I was born here in Houston, Texas, but really, I grew up. I'm what's called a third culture kid. My parents were one culture, my household was one culture, but I grew up in obviously an American culture, and that what produced in me was a third culture, just a meld of the two, right? But one of the interesting things is, as it pertains to entrepreneurship and growing businesses, is that one aspect of that revealed to me was risk profile. And obviously, if you're going to immigrate halfway across the world with basically nothing in your pocket, which is what my parents did. I think my parents had a total between the two. They had like $150 in their pocket when they flew over, in '69 from the Philippines to here. Your risk profile is all of a sudden very different than anyone else around you, because that's what you only know, right? You only know parents that took that risk. And even now, people ask me like, hey, I want to jump off and I want to do my own thing. Like, look, it sounds so risky. And my response to them is, hey, listen, and this is, for most of our colleagues, what happens if you start something and you fail? And their answer really is, if they really think through it, they're like, well, I'll go back to my old job. Okay, thumbs up. And some of them even get to, well, man, I would have to move back in with my parents, right? I said, well, listen, in the rest of the world, living with your parents is a normal thing, right? Yeah. It's just what happens. In my own personal world, my cousins back in the Philippines, I got 4 generations of cousins and family members living under one roof. Literally 4 generations. My grandmother all the way down, her daughter, her daughter, and their kids, right? So what you and I and all the rest of most of America view as risk, as the safety net, is actually everyone else's normal.
It's crazy, right? Like the perspective is just there. And one of the best things, like we're pretty dived into the Filipino culture right now with our company, because we have a bunch of people overseas that work for us full time that are in Manila and a few other areas, and so we're kind of tied into that. And I experienced the same thing, which is like risk. We are not taking risk anywhere, like on the continent, right?
No,
anywhere in North America, you're not taking risks. Like maybe there's some really hardcore places in Mexico that, have taken some serious risks. But like if you're in Canada or the US, you have never actually taken real risk where it's like, I might die. You know what I mean? Like
right.
That's like the real risk. The risk here is, like you said, I might file bankruptcy, or my company might die, or, I might have to move back in with my family or whatever, right? That's the risk. And the crazy thing is I'm pretty confident that now that I've seen a lot of businesses grow, the risk is there if you don't take action. Like if you just stop, you're going to create that for yourself. But it's actually pretty hard to screw up a company as long as you put in the effort every single day and you know what you're trying to build. So I agree with you 100% that backing for you, that's got to be a huge advantage for you, given that you're like, I started off with the worst possible circumstance. There's a risk to you is your threshold's probably way up here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it really is eye-opening when I tell people your safety net is everyone else's normal, right? So, that's the background that has really led me to do what I've done. It's just knowing that I've just got a higher risk profile than most people around me. relative to people around me, but I know that risk profile is pretty minimal in the grand scheme of things. So, from there, then I just had a chance I went to Texas A&M and got to work with President Bush Sr. in his personal office in Houston. And that was really eye-opening in terms of seeing how he operated on such a relational level. And we talk about growing businesses, and for a lot of people, it's about the money. But really, for me, it's about, when it comes down to it, the company is only as good as its team. And President Bush Sr. did a fantastic job of really engendering loyalty and really caring for the people around him. And that he built such a great organization, personal organization in the White House. And then even after, after his time, his organization of his personal office, his presidential library, his foundation, because he just cared for people, right? And so that has really marked how I operate our companies. And a part of that too is there's a group out of New York called Praxis Labs, and Praxis really espouses what we call a redemptive organization. And it's I mentioned this because it really is intrinsic to the way that I want to run companies, and that might be interesting to the folks who are listening as well. Most companies are exploitative, and those companies are where the leaders eat first, so to speak. The employees are treated unfairly, and the society and culture is a net negative because that company exists. And we can all probably look at, identify
tons of examples
without naming any names, right? There's a second type of company, which is what most people think they strive towards, which is an ethical company. And an ethical company is where leaders eat alongside their employees. Employees are treated fairly, and culture and society are either a net neutral or they're advanced because of that company. And there are a number of ethical companies, and from the Patagonias of the world to whomever, and on a small business basis, there are probably a lot of ethical companies as well that are striving to be ethical, right? But I don't want to stop there. There's a third type of company that Praxis espouses, and I'm a member of their little community, and that's a redemptive company. And a redemptive company is where leaders eat last. They're sacrificial. A redemptive company is where employees are not just treated fairly, they're treated generously, even at the expense of a little bit of margin, because the larger picture is the last is most important. The company, for the culture and society around it, the company doesn't just advance culture, it renews it and redeems it. And that type of redemptive company is what I'm trying to build with Eden Green. And it's something that I think if more people, more entrepreneurs began with that seed, it would change an entire culture. If they just didn't stop at just being ethical, but went towards being redemptive in their own way, in their own shape, and building a business model around that, right?
Yeah, and for those of you who are listening to the show here, if you want to check out more right now, just drop the link here. It's edengreen.com. It's EDEN green, like the color, GREN.com, edengreen.com. Check that out because I think it'll give you a little bit more color around what you're looking for. Tell us a little bit about why you want to make this change. What's the logic behind it?
The quick story, and we talked about it before we jumped on here, but I started a digital ad agency in 2010. And then sold it after my time in the White House, which is a whole nother story. I started a digital ad agency with a co-founder in 2010, sold it in 2016, bought it back 11 months later for a really good price, I'll just say that, and then continued to run it and grow it. But after we had sold it the first time and we had a chance to take a step back, I think both my business partner and I were thinking, man, what would we do differently with the company? And then just what would we do differently overall, right? And after we had a chance to buy it back, it really afforded us the opportunity to run that business in a different way, but also to think about, hey, what else is out there while this business is running well and it's growing, right? And so during that time, I would say 2018, 2019, it started to really dawn on me. There are three things that and I'm a man of faith, and so there are three things that God had put on my heart. One is I wanted to run a hardware software company. Two is I'd been there, done that, and gotten the M&A t-shirt twice for a professional services company. So I wanted to run a hardware software company. The second is I wanted to have an exponential impact on culture and society around me. Meaning that for one unit of effort that I put into a company, I wanted to see a 10 or 20x return on that effort in terms of affecting culture. And then the third thing is through praxis, I knew I wanted to run a redemptive organization. I didn't know what that would look like in a company. I knew I wanted those three things. And so I shared it with a couple of friends and colleagues, and then a colleague put me on to Eden Green, where they needed new direction. They needed a CEO that had a larger vision. And then the company, because of just how it was created and the technology that it patented, checked all three of those boxes. I didn't know I was going to run an ag tech company. I just knew I wanted to be a part of a company that checked all three of those boxes. And it just happened to check all three of those boxes. And it just happened to be that that I was the person to run the whole thing. So that's the why behind I got into Eden Green. And then the why behind Eden Green is something spectacular. It's two brothers in South Africa who had a very, very just impactful conversation with a young boy who basically was stuffing his pockets with food. And they asked him why he was hoarding. And he said, well, it's not my day to eat. It's my little sister's who's back at home. And this kid was probably 5 years old, 6 years old. It's my little sister's day to eat, not mine. And so I'm bringing this back to her. And it just struck a chord with them of like, man, what kind of world do we live in where people have to have days to eat, specific days to eat? And so they went about and started creating this technology, which is vertical farm. It's a patented tower that can grow greens, and it's very densely packed inside of a greenhouse that uses sunlight, right? Natural sunlight, as opposed to being all indoors. But the way they designed it and the fact that they put it in a greenhouse and designed it to be in greenhouses has produced a technology, a platform that in an acre and a half can consistently produce on a consistent harvest, every other day harvest type deal, consistently harvest 500 tons of leafy greens over the course of a year. Yeah, 11 to 13 harvests a year.
That's a huge deal.
It's game changing, and you can put it in an acre and a half. So no longer do you have to have 35 farming acres out in the middle of nowhere consuming vast amounts of resources, water, fertilizer, right? Diesel for harvesting and planting. And then you have to truck it in food miles, truck it in thousands of miles. Here in the US, you're trucking it in from Salinas Valley, California, all the way to the Midwest, or sometimes even the East Coast. No longer do you have to use those food miles. You can put those acre and a half modules and platforms, and you can scale them out in the middle of a city. You can put them on the edges of a city. You can put them 20 miles away from the dense urban population that eats the most of these greens. So you're totally fundamentally changing the food supply chain in terms of consistency, in terms of accessibility, right? Because all of a sudden it becomes more affordable, and you and I are not just the beneficiaries of a fantastic local farmers market, but people who are working 2 jobs and have 2 kids and are maybe single parents can afford and access nutritious leafy greens for their kids. And then lastly, it's safe, right? You're not having to worry about fertilizers and E. coli outbreaks and 2 weeks in the food supply system before it gets to the shelf. And then by the time it gets to your fridge, it goes bad in 3 days, right? We eliminate all of that by having these greenhouses in urban or suburban settings, and because they're so dense, it makes sense from a land usage, land cost perspective.
And who are the kind of people who are buying from you guys? Is it individuals? Is it companies and individuals? Is it people who own land? Like, walk us through what the business model is there.
Yeah, so the business model really is greenhouse as a service. So we want to sell to growers, suppliers, retail, grocers, as well as philanthropies that want to make a social impact, and municipalities and nation states that maybe want to look at food as national security, which we're seeing. It's undeniable, especially after the pandemic, which actually really highlighted us, because the broken supply chains revealed a flaw in national security, and that was, how do you feed your people when everything else is shut down, right?
Very challenging, right? All the supply chain was screwed up. Yeah, everything.
Totally, right? And it continues to be. We've got a drought out in California right now, and farmers have chosen not to even plant. So we don't feel it right now because the harvest isn't there yet, but prices on produce are going to go up noticeably, because these farmers they're not even planting this round because it doesn't make sense for them because of the drought. So those are the types of folks that we're trying to sell to. And we're basically saying, hey, if you want to be food independent, if you want resiliency for your city, for your county, for your municipality, as a supplier or a retailer, if you want vertical integration of your food supply chain, where you can have more control, more consistency, more accessibility, right? And you can cut down on your own logistics, costs, and pass on that margin to your consumer, then this is for you.
And the people that, as they go through this process of buying and implementing these towers, are they usually buying 1 or 2 or 10? Like, it is just dependent on food usage. Like, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So an 1.5 acre module is our base module, 500 tons. We know, we just done the math here in Dallas, Fort Worth, which Dallas is the 9th largest city in the United States, and Fort Worth is the 12th largest city in the United States. So put those together, it's a pretty hefty population. This population, with current demands, both from retail as well as from institutionals, right? Like hospitality, restaurants, whatnot, from institutional growers and buyers. Dallas-Fort Worth could probably absorb 10 greenhouses of produce.
Wow. In 1 year, they get just
1 year.
They'll consume 100, all of that.
Right. So then you extrapolate that out to the United States, and I mean, you're talking about hundreds of greenhouses, and that's what we want to create. People on your, who listen are probably aware of the Boweries and the Aero Farms of the world, who are building these huge 60-acre facilities in Kentucky or in Wyoming or wherever. We want to go the opposite direction. We actually want a decentralized, much like the cloud, right? The computing cloud. We want to decentralize these greenhouses all across the United States, so that you have a mesh network of greenhouses. What that does is it changes the game in terms of locally grown food, right? Because you're not having to ship that around anywhere. And then the flexibility of, if a greenhouse is in Pittsburgh and the market dynamics are, it's at this price and they really like kale. Well, down in Alabama, it's at this price and they really like collard greens. And down here in Dallas, it's at this price and they really want arugula and spinach and butter lettuce. Well, if you're a 60-acre farm out in Kentucky, you're having to ship, I mean, that's a really complicated crop schedule and shipping and timing and all that. But if you got these 1.5 acre greenhouses in Pittsburgh, Alabama, and Dallas, well, then you grow what you need to grow, right? It's market demand. So it's a cloud, it's a mesh network, customer-centric way of growing greens, which is totally different than the current model right now. That's why it's such a big deal to us.
Yeah, and so I want to keep the episode relatively short because I think this is like people like to listen and execute on
Yeah.
listening to the show, right? Like how do we learn more? So if people want to learn more, eatinggreen.com is a good place to start. What is there any other resource or place that they should go to kind of learn about this concept? Because this is like very different than what currently exists out there. So is there anything
Yeah.
you'd point them to either on the website or LinkedIn or your anywhere
Yeah,
that you'd say, hey, go here and check this out?
So my team has done a really good job. If you look on, if you go to look on LinkedIn or you look on Instagram, which is or Facebook too, you'll see Eden Green's posts. But my team has done a good job of creating content, not just about our technology, but around just the market dynamics and in the consumer needs as it stands, and even just about hydroponics, like hydroponics 101, right? What is that? My team's created some great content around there. So we're really focused on, and this goes more to a business building model, right? Which, I know a lot of your audience is interested in, but to build a business, you really have to contextualize your business, not just in terms of features and benefits, but in terms of value props to the people who are interested, either both as consumers, direct buyers, or advocates, right? You've got this marketing life cycle, if you will, of taking your audience from being aware to being educated to actually executing on buying, but then also being loyal. And then beyond loyalty programs, advocacy. And that's where people are talking about you without you even having to mention it, right? They're true ambassadors. Taking them through that marketing life cycle requires you in the education and awareness space to not just talk about what you are and your brand, but to talk about the things that matter to them and the value props in the context of your industry and the context of their needs and how you provide that value to them. So, it's a features versus benefits type conversation. And a lot of what my team has done on the marketing side is to talk about benefits and context and value props, and not just cool little features of hydroponics or our technology.
Yeah, no, and that's critical. I think, again, for the people who listen to the show, there are a lot of business owners, people within the United States and Canada that are like, hey, I'm trying to grow a business. I know how business works, but I'm also socially conscious, right? There's a lot of that going on right now. So if you're interested in kind of understanding more about the tech and why this is important, because I'm sure some people are like, hey, why now? Eatinggreen.com. It's EDEN green, like the color GREEN.com. Check them out. Eddy, CEO running the show over there. If you guys need something, check out the marketing stuff on all the different socials on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn as well, and reach out and kind of start that conversation, because I think this is really important with food going forward. Thank you so much for coming on the Prospecting Show, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.